American West, Harlan Basin, Wyoming, 1884. Bulum Bulum 40 min narration, 5,148 words. She drove the last nail on a Tuesday morning in August, standing on a kitchen chair with the hammer from her father's toolbox and the carved wooden sign he had made himself in the winter of 1869. The men from the Territorial Land Office were still in the yard. The sign was oak, 18 inches long, the letters cut deep and clean with a chisel her father had kept sharp because precision mattered and because your name on something meant something. It read Calloway in capitals that were both plain and certain. One of the men in the yard, the taller one, with a territorial badge pinned too high on his coat, which was the sort of detail her father had always said told you everything about a man, said something to the other that Nora did not hear and did not need to. She stepped down from the chair. She said, "The deed is recorded in Laramie County in my father's name and transferred to me by his hand in March before he died, witnessed by 2 men who can be reached by Monday if you'd care to verify." She did not look at the sign above the door, but she felt it there the way you feel something you have fixed that needed fixing. The men did not leave that morning. They stood in the yard and consulted a document one of them kept folded in a leather case, and when they finally mounted and rode south toward town, they rode with the particular unhurried quality of men who expected to return. Nora Calloway was 34 years old and had been running the Harlan Basin Ranch alone since March, when her father Elias had died of the lung trouble that had followed him since a winter cattle drive in 1877. She had been running it alongside him since she was 19, and before that she had been learning it since she was old enough to hold a fence wire. The ranch was 280 acres, with 41 head of sound Hereford cattle, a barn that needed the east wall attended to before winter, and a reputation in Harlan Basin for producing the best-conditioned horses for sale east of the range. Her father had built all of this from a single territorial homestead claim and $40 and the absolute certainty that a man who worked his land honestly deserved to keep it. The lung trouble had taken him before he could see the spring calves, which was the thing that Nora found herself unable to make peace with, not because the calves were particularly significant in themselves, but because her father had said in January, with the specific pleasure of a man counting forward through the calendar, that he expected a strong spring for the Hereford and intended to be there for it. He had not been there for it. She had nailed the sign above the door 2 days after the first letter arrived from something called the Harlan Basin Development Association, which had been formed the previous October by 3 men whose names she recognized as the sort of men who formed things for reasons they did not publicize. The sign had been in the barn since her father made it in 1869, wrapped in oilcloth in the back of the tool corner, waiting 15 years for someone to mount it. Her father had always said the ranch knew its own name without a sign, and then had never mounted it because there was always something more pressing. When the land office men appeared on the first Tuesday of August, Nora went to the kitchen, picked up the sign, found the hammer, borrowed the chair, and put her father's name above her door. The stranger arrived on a Thursday, coming up the road from the south on a gray horse that showed quality beneath the dust, and he stopped at the yard fence and did not come through it, which was a courtesy not every traveler extended. He was somewhere in his middle 30s, lean, wearing a good coat that had seen better circumstances, with the stillness of a man who had spent considerable time in his own company. She was at the fence line near the barn when he stopped, which meant she saw him read the sign before he saw her watching him read it. He looked at it once, straightforwardly, and then something happened in his face. Not a dramatic change, a small one, the kind of shift that happens when a word connects to something already in a person's mind, and he looked at it again. 2 full looks, with a pause between them that was long enough to be deliberate. Then he sat on his horse for another moment without doing anything at all, and then he turned and found Nora at the fence line and held her gaze with the direct look of a man who was not surprised to be caught. She walked to the yard fence and said, "The road south goes into Harlantown. The road north goes to the Birch Creek pastures and then nowhere useful." She said it without hostility, but without invitation, which was the tone her father had always recommended for strangers who stopped without clear business. He said he was looking for work, and his name, when she asked for it, was Callum. He offered no family name, which was either ordinary Western privacy or something else, and she filed this away and said she had fence work and barn work and paid fair for fair work and did not take advances on wages. He said that was acceptable. He worked through Thursday afternoon and all of Friday on the east barn wall, and his work was the kind that tells you immediately whether a man knows what he is doing, which this man did. He assessed the wall before he touched it, used materials without wasting them, and by Friday evening the east wall was 2/3 done, and the part that was done correctly. She fed him supper because her father had always fed working men at day's end, and he ate without comment except to say the biscuits were good. When the meal was finished, he went to the bunkhouse, and Nora wrote in the ranch log that she had taken on a hand named Callum, no family name provided. She had written this and then looked at what she had written. She had taken on a man whose family name she had not obtained, which was not something she would ordinarily have done, and the only answer she arrived at was that something about the way he had looked at the sign had made her want to know what was in the looking before she asked what was in the name. The Harlan Basin Development Association sent another letter on Saturday, saying the association had acquired grazing rights to eastern sections of several properties through a process called Territorial Reassignment, and that her cooperation in boundary verification would be appreciated. Nora read it 3 times and understood it the same way she understood a badge pinned too high, not through legal training, but through 15 years of watching her father read documents designed to mislead. She folded the letter and placed it in the strongbox next to the deed and the transfer papers and the certified survey, and then she sat at the kitchen table and thought about what her father would have done. Elias Calloway had believed in doing things in the right order, understand the threat fully, prepare for it thoroughly, then address it directly with the full weight of what you had prepared. She was afraid in the specific and practical way that a person who has built something over a long time becomes afraid when something large and organized moves toward it. She was not paralyzed by this. She had a letter to answer, a lawyer in Laramie City to contact, and a fight she needed to understand before she could begin to prepare for it. On Sunday morning, she found Callum at the barn before she had finished her coffee, which told her he started before being told to. She told him about the association letter not because he had a stake in it, but because she had found herself wanting to say it out loud to someone. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Territorial reassignment isn't a legal mechanism under Wyoming territorial law as it stood through last year." He said it simply, without making an event of it, and then went back to looking at the barn wall. She looked at him for a moment and said, "How do you know that?" He was quiet in the way of a man deciding how much to say at once, and then he said, "I read law for 2 years before I came west. I did not finish reading it." He picked up his tools and continued with the barn wall, and Nora went back inside to write her letter to the Laramie lawyer. She thought about the twice reading for 3 days before asking him about it, and she was not ready until Wednesday, when she had completed her letter, received a useful response from the lawyer, and put herself in the position her father had recommended, fully prepared before engaging. She asked him on Wednesday evening after supper, saying simply that she had noticed him read the sign twice. He did not look away when she said it, which told her he had been expecting the question, and he said yes, he had read it twice, and then he waited. He said, "My mother's name was Calloway before she married," and he said it looking at his coffee before looking up with the careful eyes of a man setting something down in front of another person for the first time. Her family had come from this county. She had left at 17, died when he was 14, and never came back but had spoken of this place throughout her life. Nora was quiet for the length of time this required. She said, "What was her father's name?" He said, "Edmund." She said, "Edmund Calloway homesteaded the south section of what is now this ranch in 1851. He was my grandfather. He died in 1868, and his son Elias, my father, took the full holding. The deed records show both names." She looked at the coffee cups on the table and at the window and at the Calloway sign above the door. She said, "Your mother was my father's sister." Neither of them said anything for a long time after that, and the word sister sat in the kitchen with them, carrying an entire history of absence that neither of them had caused. He said his mother had never described the old disagreement with any clarity, and Nora said her father had never mentioned a sister. He had never spoken of things that hurt him, which was his only failing and a significant one. They sat with the strangeness of it for a long time, and when they stopped sitting with it, the evening had gone entirely to dark and the coffee was cold, and something in the shape of the kitchen had changed in a way that was not visible but that both of them felt. He said he was sorry for her father. She said she was sorry for his mother. Then they both went to their respective places and left the kitchen empty with the news it had been given. She lay awake thinking about a girl who had carried this land's name hidden in the middle of her own for the rest of her life, and about a son who had stopped at a fence because he recognized a word he had not expected to find. She thought about her father, who had kept silent about his sister for 60 years, and she understood it and could not entirely forgive it and did not need to. The following Monday, 3 men came to the ranch, 2 who had come before and a third named Hargrove, the association's acting administrator, who believed a pressed suit and large words constituted legal authority. Hargrove informed Nora that the reassignment process had been validated by a deputy administrator in Cheyenne and that she would be required to submit to a boundary survey within 30 days. Nora said, "The name of the deputy administrator." Hargrove said this was a matter of internal process and not subject to public inquiry. Nora said, "The name of the territorial statute under which reassignment of recorded homestead deeds is authorized." Hargrove's suit was pressed, but his answer was not ready, and he moved through several preparations for a response without arriving at one. Callum came around the corner of the barn at this point, with the unhurried movement of a man who had finished one task and was finding the next. He stopped near the house and took in the 3 men and said nothing, and Nora introduced Callum as her ranch hand without a family name, and did not look at Callum when she said it. Hargrove said the matter would proceed regardless. Nora said any survey team entering without a proper Wyoming court order would be asked to leave, with written cause filed in Laramie County alongside the deed, the transfer documents, and the full association correspondence, which she had kept carefully. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment, and then he and the 2 men left. When they were gone, Callum said the deputy administrator, if there was one, may not have formally authorized anything. Nora said her lawyer believed the association was applying pressure without legal backing, hoping pressure alone would be sufficient, and they might be right, since she had 41 cattle and a deed, and not much else. They worked the ranch through August and into September in the parallel manner of 2 people who have established a working rhythm. He finished the east barn wall and began on the north fencing while she managed the cattle, the books, and the ongoing correspondence with Martha Elgin, who had described the association's tactics as legally adventurous and personally contemptible. He was not a man who talked without cause, and she was not a woman who needed conversation for its own sake, and this made them well suited for the long working days and the evenings that followed. They talked about practical things, and occasionally about less practical ones, and she found that his opinions were precise and arrived at through the kind of considered thought that produced opinions worth hearing. He spoke about his mother in pieces, which was the natural way for such a thing to emerge. She had spoken of Wyoming the way people speak of a place loved and left under circumstances they could not repair, and had kept the Calloway name as her middle name after her marriage. Not lost, but not shown, the way people carry something without advertising it. Nora found the detail about the middle name the thing that stayed with her longest, because her father had kept his sister in the same position, not lost, but not shown. She did not say this to Callum. She said only that his mother must have been a woman of considerable fortitude, and he said he believed she had been. The survey team arrived on a Wednesday in late September, 4 men with equipment that looked official at a distance, and they came to the south boundary of the property and began setting marks that Nora immediately recognized from the survey she had obtained from Laramie as 20 feet inside the recorded property line. She met them at the south boundary with the survey documents in her hand. She said the recorded boundary was 20 feet south of where they were standing. The lead surveyor, a careful-looking man who did not seem personally committed to the outcome, looked at her documents and then at his own and said, without conviction, that there was a discrepancy in the Territorial Office records. Nora said she had a certified copy of the Laramie County Deed Office record and suggested he look at both sets of documents side by side before proceeding. Callum arrived at the south boundary during this exchange and stood at the edge of the conversation without inserting himself into it. She had noticed this about him. He appeared when something was happening and stood where he could be useful without making himself the matter at hand, which was a skill not every man had developed and which Nora found more reassuring than a louder form of support would have been. The lead surveyor examined both sets of documents for a long time and then said he would need to consult with the organization before proceeding. He and the 3 other men withdrew to the South Road and did not return that day. Nora walked back to the house with the documents and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without doing anything in particular, which was unusual for her. Callum came in after a while and put coffee on without being asked and sat at the table across from her. She said the documents were clear, and he said yes. She said the association knew the documents were clear, and he said yes. She said the survey had not been about the documents, and after a moment he said no. It had been about whether she would yield before the documents became relevant. She said her father would have said the same, and Callum said he sounded like a careful man. She said yes, the most careful she had ever known. He asked if that was where she had learned it, the specific kind of careful she was, going to the south boundary with the document instead of just the argument. She said yes. He said it sounded like a good teacher. She said yes, and that was the end of that conversation, and she thought about it afterward. The Development Association's next move came through the county sheriff. Sheriff Prentice was not a bad man, but was one who had been elected with the association's support and owed that support in ways not discussed openly. He came on a Thursday morning with a document he presented as a territorial court order requiring Nora to submit to the boundary survey. Nora took the document and read it, looking for the court name and the judge's signature. She said she would need until Monday to respond through her legal representative. Prentice said the document required a response within 48 hours, and she said she was aware of the terms and would respond through legal representation within 48 hours, and she did not say anything else. She sent a telegram to Martha Elgin that afternoon, and Callum drove her to town without being asked. On the way back, she told him what the document contained and what she expected the lawyer to find, and he listened without offering opinions she had not asked for, something she had come to rely on and recognized as a form of respect. Elgin's response confirmed what Nora had suspected. The 3rd Territorial District Court order was irregular in 3 ways that a competent judge would not have permitted, suggesting the judge had been approached by the association under circumstances the Cheyenne Bar Association would find interesting to examine. Elgin said she was filing a challenge on Monday and believed the order would not survive examination. Nora read this letter twice and then let herself feel, for approximately 4 minutes, the specific exhaustion of sustained vigilance. Then she put the letter in the strongbox with the others and went to check the Hereford calves, which were doing well, and noted this in the ranch log the way her father had taught her to note things that went right. She told Callum about Elgin's assessment that evening, and he said a bar association complaint had real teeth if the facts held. She asked whether he had thought about finishing his law reading. He said he had thought about it recently, and that what had stopped him before was the idea most men came west with, that a complicated life could be solved by a simpler one. She asked if it had worked. He said not as a permanent solution. There was something in this exchange that was different from the practical conversations about ranch work and legal documents, and they both knew it, and neither made a direct observation about it, which was itself a kind of conversation. Nora looked at the Calloway sign above the door on her way to bed and thought about names and what you carry with you and what finds you anyway, 30 years later, on a gray horse from the south. The public confrontation came on a Friday in October at the County Land Board meeting, where Nora had submitted her challenge to the court order. The association had sent Hargrove and 2 lawyers. Nora sat at the table with her documents and Martha Elgin, a small, sharp-eyed woman of about 50, who had been underestimated many times and found it professionally useful. Hargrove presented the association's position with considerable confidence and some length, describing the territorial reassignment process in terms that were technically possible to misunderstand as legitimate. Nora watched the 3 land board members while he spoke and saw 2 of them doing the kind of listening that people do when they have been told in advance what conclusion to reach, and the third, a man named Aiken who had been on the board for 20 years, listening differently. Martha Elgin presented the challenge precisely and briefly, connecting each of the 3 irregularities in the court order to the specific territorial statute it violated, submitting the original deed and certified survey, and saying to the board in her dry manner that any proceeding relying on documents as irregular as these was not one a functioning land board would choose to attach itself to. Aiken made a note. The other 2 board members looked at each other. During the recess, Nora stood near the window and looked at the October light on the basin, the kind of light that made the land look as though it had been placed there carefully and intended to remain. Callum stood nearby, not close enough to suggest anything, close enough to stand where a person stands when they are with someone. The board returned and Aiken spoke for them. He said the court order contained irregularities the board found disqualifying, and that the boundary survey would be suspended pending review of the 3rd Territorial District proceedings by the Cheyenne Bar Association. He said the Calloway Ranch deed and survey, as recorded in Laramie County, would remain the operative documents until further notice. Hargrove said this was a temporary setback. Elgin asked him to clarify which part of a finding of procedural violation by a duly constituted land board he considered temporary. Hargrove said several things after that which were not legally significant, but were delivered with feeling, and Nora signed the documents Elgin placed in front of her, and thanked the board, and walked out of the meeting hall into the October afternoon. She stood in the street and breathed the cold air that smelled of horses and wood smoke, and the alkaline quality of Wyoming in fall, as much a part of her understanding of home as the deed in the strongbox. Callum stood beside her and said nothing for a while, and then he said her father had built something worth keeping, and she said yes, simply, as a fact. They drove back to the ranch in the late October afternoon, and the aspens along the creek road were turning gold in the way that made the light look as though it came from the trees rather than the sky. Nora looked at the land as they came up the road toward the house with her father's name above the door, which she could read from 100 yards in the clear afternoon. She had driven this road 10,000 times in snow and mud and summer heat and Wyoming October, and she had driven it with her father and without him, and with hired hands and alone. Today she drove it with a man whose mother had carried this land's name in the middle of her own name for 30 years, and who had come to a fence and read it twice because it meant something to him. He stayed through October and into November, and Elgin sent word that the Bar Association inquiry had produced enough discomfort in Cheyenne to make the Development Association quieter about its territorial operations. The east barn wall was finished, the north fencing was sound, and the calves came through the early cold well. On a Wednesday in November, she found him in the barn looking at her father's toolbox, which he had used throughout the fall for the barn work. He was not touching it, only looking at it, and she stood at the barn door for a moment before he heard her. She said the chisel that had cut the sign was in that box, and that her father would have wanted him to use it. He said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because his sister's son came to his ranch when it needed someone, and stayed." She paused. He would have considered that an obligation repaid from a direction he hadn't anticipated, which was his favorite kind. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. He said he had not come because of the family connection. He had not known about it when he arrived, but because the sign read like an answer to a question about where his mother came from. She asked if it had answered it. He looked at the toolbox and said he thought the rest answered itself gradually, and she said that was generally how it worked. She said there was a second set of books he could learn, the ranch books, and no reason they needed to be kept by one person. He said that was more than a job offer. She said yes. He said he would need the rest of the story before giving a proper answer, and she said she had about 50 years of it to tell. He said that should be enough. The Development Association did not disappear from Harlan Basin. Large, organized things rarely did where land was valuable. But they moved their attentions toward properties without Laramie lawyers and certified surveys, and a woman who could cite territorial statute in a yard confrontation, which was not justice in the complete sense, but was what victory looked like most of the time. Elgin's final letter in December described the Bar Association's findings, which were sufficient to have the court order vacated formally. She closed the letter with one line that Nora read twice and kept. "A well-recorded deed, and a woman who knows how to read it are more durable than any association's patience." Nora put the letter in the strongbox and stood for a moment thinking about durable things. Edmund, who put his name on this land in 1851. Elias, who made a sign and stored it in the barn intending to get around to mounting it. She thought about a girl who had left and carried a name in the middle of her own name for the rest of her life. There is a thing about names on buildings in the American West that is easy to miss. The names were put there not for advertising or pride, but for continuity, a statement that someone was here and intended to stay, serious enough to carve in wood and mount above the door so the land itself would know who was responsible. Elias Calloway had known this when he made the sign in 1869 and had not gotten around to mounting it, and Nora had known it when she carried the sign from the barn on a Tuesday morning with the land office men still in her yard. And Callum had known something about it when he stopped on a gray horse from the south and read those letters twice before he saw the woman at the fence line who would ask him what he was looking for. Names matter in ways we do not always account for, carrying people who are gone while reaching forward and backward at the same time. A name above a door is a statement about time, not just the past, but the intention of a future, someone's decision to be here tomorrow, and the season after, and for as long as the wood holds. Nora Calloway kept her father's name above the door through all the winters that followed, through the good years and the hard ones, and through all of it the letters stayed legible because the chisel had been sharp and the wood had been chosen well, and the man who made the sign had understood what he was making. Some things are worth nailing in place. Some things, once you have carried them far enough and they have proven their weight and their meaning, deserve to be made permanent, not because the nailing makes them real, but because it declares that you understand what you have. The man who had stopped to read the name twice was learning, slowly and in the incremental way that durable things are always learned, that this particular piece of land was one of them. Take care of yourselves out there. Until next time, keep riding.